if I'm doing something as a means to an end, if I'm saying, right, I'm doing this now because it's going to lead to this outcome in the future that's going to make me happy, almost every project I've launched on that basis has failed. Whereas if I do something and it's like I'm going to enjoy the process of doing it, regardless if I fail or not, it tends to go well. Very simplistic, but that's what I've found in my own.
Exactly. That's exactly how I framed my switch of careers from tech into more of what I'm doing now, which is again is just intellectual work, which is when I was building the business, even the one that worked, I had the sense that even if I succeeded, I would have failed. Like even if this would become $1 billion company, it's looking like it's going to be $1 billion company within the next 10 years. But even if I did that and I spent the rest of my 20s doing this, I would have failed in some deep sense because I don't really want to do that, like physical desire wise. I want to spend my 20s basically chasing ideas and exploring. But how I feel about this current thing that I'm doing, right? This Western Canon Great Books lecture series is even if I fail, I succeeded. Even if after a year no one watches any of my stuff, people stop like engaging with any of the content. The fact that I got to spend these 2 years just to talk with people and read that is already the reward.
Okay, Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Niall.
To get started, could you maybe just tell us, why is mimetic theory so important to understand? Why does this matter? Why have you spent a lot of time researching this topic?
Well, perhaps the first thing to say is that mimetic theory believes that human psychology is trying to hide mimetic theory from itself, and I'll elaborate what that means. The core tenet of mimetic theory is a large part of our desire is not because of the object, but because of I want to be like the person associated with the object, right? So a good example here is the iPhone. Why do some people sell their kidneys to buy an iPhone? Maybe it has to do with the functionality. Android doesn't have this, but at least in the early years when the iPhone was a lot more prestigious, it was because the celebrities owned it. It was because it had great aesthetic appeal. It was because of the people who you associated had an iPhone versus the Android nerds who didn't have an iPhone. And Girard thinks that what powers this desire is a tremendous lack. And the exact phrase that he uses is that we lack being. And so maybe this idea of, if you want to translate to psychology, it would be something like insecurity, but in a deep and existential way. And so we try to acquire these objects to be like the people associated with them. But psychology lies to itself because you don't, when you're desirous of the iPhone, you don't think, oh, I only like this because I saw this great podcaster, Niall, had this phone and I want to be like Niall. You don't think that. You think directly, no, no, this object is going to make me whole, right? And maybe now it's silly to think about an iPhone, but think about a spouse, think about a career, think about a job, things more serious that people can relate to. And human psychology, so for Girard, the nature of desire is triangular, right? When I desire the iPhone or the job at an investment banking place, let's say, it appears like my desire is directly towards that thing, but it is actually because of the people associated with that thing. But Girard thinks that desire occludes this. Desire tries to hide this from you. And so it makes the triangular relationship where it goes to another person appear as if it's an arrow, because that's what's going to get you to desire it even more strongly. And so I suppose that's the first cut at it, is because it has something to do, mimetic theory has something to offer us about the most important aspects of our lives, and importantly, an aspect of our lives that we have hidden from ourselves.
Amazing, amazing. The example that came to mind for me whenever I was thinking about this was, so whenever I was like 9 or 10, I was obsessed with football, or you guys would call it soccer in the US. And a pair of football boots might cost, say, £40 here, right? But around that time, say I was like 9 or 10, Adidas came out with a new pair of boots that they created with David Beckham. And these were the Predator Pulses or whatever. And they were like £140. And as a 10-year-old, like I really wanted these boots. And the reason that I wanted these boots is I think if I get these football boots, I'm going to get some of the magic of David Beckham. I'll become like David Beckham by acquiring this object. So this is an example
Right.
of mimetic theory and metaphysical desire.
Exactly. And so I think I misspoke in the lecture series when I said the Be Like Mike campaign for Michael Jordan had to do with his shoes. I think it had to do with maybe a Gatorade commercial, but anyways, like this is literally being used as an advertisement slogan, right? Be like Mike. Like if you have this, you will be like Michael Jordan. Now, of course, that's kind of silly when you put it that way. Of course, you're not going to be Beckham if you just buy his shoes. But that's the kind of trick that psychology, Girard thinks, plays on us. And what's really interesting here is I think all of advertisement can be distilled down into this insight on mimetic desire, which is, you know, the BMW ads, luxury car ads, always show it with a beautiful woman. They never talk about, oh, the horsepower and how gas efficient it is, and because advertisers know at the end of the day, that's not what we're looking for when we're going after things. Even though we tell ourselves, right? And it's very interesting that way because we can't say, "Oh, I got this car because I saw a beautiful woman with it, and maybe if I get that car, I'll be like that guy." Um, so it's almost like the reasons you give are excuses, and so it's almost like the advertiser needs to give you excuses to buy this thing, right? Because you have to say, "Oh, well, I bought the iPhone because of the rear camera and the 16 megapixels." But the real reason has nothing to do with that. The real reason has to do with the people that is associated with that. And so maybe you can interpret that as the art of advertisement.
For sure. It's almost like we're all carrying around like our own internal PR man, and they are just like given the rational reasons why we are chasing these things for metaphysical
Exactly, yeah.
reasons.
And this is I believe this is quite well documented in the psychology literature. I think it's called confabulation. There's some split brain patients, I believe, where I think how this don't quote me on this. I'm not an empirical psychologist. I think when the brain is split, the different hemispheres of the brain correspond to the different like my right eye is perceived by my left side. And so I think what they did is they showed something only to the left side of the brain, and I think the confabulation center is on the right side. It could be vice versa. And it was something like the left side was told, get up now, because it was told get up now because XYZ reason. And then it asks the researchers ask the right side, like, why did you get up? And it just completely makes up another reason. So I think this is quite well documented in the psychology literature as well. That the human brain has this tendency to invent reasons, even when the actual reason is a lot deeper.
For sure, for sure. Now, I've heard you say that most people come to Girard and mimetic theory through suffering and failure. So I'm just curious, what have been the failures and suffering that led you to Girard?
Yeah. I might say that for all of philosophy, actually, that most healthy people don't don't go around and wanting to spend their lives asking these questions. And this for example in Stoicism as well. So right now I'm preparing a series of lectures on the Stoics, and when things were going fine and well in the Roman Republic, Stoicism was not that popular. But in the Roman Empire, when people started losing control, people started getting into Stoicism. Cicero was one of these critics of Stoicism. When he lost the Civil War, he started espousing very Stoic ideas. Anyway, that's a whole separate topic. But as it relates to myself and mimetic theory specifically, I was I grew up between Beijing and Vancouver. I was on a super tracked academic path. I competed in the Canadian Olympiad, got a full ride to Columbia to study computer science, and I dropped out my freshman spring to run a startup. So I was a tech guy, and the startup just ended crashing and burning after 2 or 3 months. Sorry, after a semester. So that would be 6 to 9 months. And when I really reflected what had gone wrong there, it wasn't like, I gave it my best shot and it didn't work. It was like I didn't really want to do the thing in the first place. And and so but that's very odd, right? Because why did I give up a full ride opportunity to do something I didn't really want to do myself? Like my day to day, like clearly I had a strong impulse to doing this thing. But my day to day, I was waking up and I was feeling I was dreading looking forward to the work. So why did that happen? On one hand, I really don't want to do it. On the other hand, I really do want to do it. And Girard just gave me the most compelling explanation of this, which was mimetic desire. That there was all these people, I call it the Zuckerberg Complex. It's cool to be a dropout these days. There's all these people who want to drop out. They seem awesome. And so you want to drop out too. And that's, there's not that much to it like that. And so I wanted to be seen as a founder more than I wanted to actually found the company. And so, then you optimize for weird stuff. Like you delay the product launch so you don't have to face with the fact that a lot of the stuff you build doesn't work. Like you try to maximize press releases, even though releases don't impact things. And so that's one aspect of how I got into it. And at the same time, it was like a double whammy, which is a technical term in philosophy. It's German, uh, and the other thing that got me into it is I just had a romantic experience where there was a girl who I was seeing, wasn't that into her. One of my friends started dating her, and then boom, like it was like this like world-ending thing, like oh my God, like what would happen? And again, like nothing about the girl has changed at all. But by the injection of another, what Girard would call model, right? In this case, my friend, suddenly the desire you feel for objects changed radically. And so clearly there was something else going on. It was the really, this is why I say suffering was what led me there. It was the great suffering of both that made me want to say, okay, I really got to understand this aspect of my life if I want to live a good life going forward. And this guy seems to know what he's talking about. So that's how I got into it.
Ah, wow. Well, I've never thought of that before, but like you call this the Zuckerberg complex there. And for a while, maybe it's still there, but for a while, a lot of young people would see their heroes like Zuckerberg or Steve Jobs, or I think even Bill Gates, like these people dropping out. And then that becomes like almost like the football boots or the Gatorade or whatever. It's the object of desire. And people think if I do that, I will become like that, you know? And I fell into the same trap when I was at university. I dropped out my last year to start my own company, and the exact same thing happened. Like I thought this is going to make me happy. I did it. And I just totally like I wanted the status of being an entrepreneur more than I actually wanted the day-to-day process of running that business. And it led to misery.
Right.
And, you know, it's not.
And by the way, I think that was a key lesson that Girard taught me because so there's actually two strands of desire. This is my reading. It's a quite niche reading of Girard. There's actually two strands of desire. There's metaphysical desire, and this is this desire for being, right? Desire for a kind of wholeness when you're feeling insecure. And the way you satisfy this desire, like we've already described, is through this triangular route. I look at who I think has being, and what this means is someone who's prestigious or successful or glorious or who has a lot of fame or um, and then I simply latch on to the things that seems to be core to his identity, right? In the case of Beckham, the boots. And but clearly, and so this aspect of desire clearly has nothing to do with the object itself. It could be anything. And by the way, this is why there's so much variation, Girard thinks, in human culture. Like, why do some people like piercing their noses and like doing all this crazy things? It has to do with this idea of metaphysical desire, because metaphysical desire ultimately is not about the object at all. That's why it's so malleable. That's why human cultures can be so malleable. But there is a different strand of desire, and this is where my sort of weird reading comes in that Girard calls physical desire, and physical desire actually has to do with the experience of your object, because clearly we clearly that's not all human nature is, right? Not all human nature is just this desire for being. We do things because we just enjoy the physical experience of them, and I think one way to understand sanity in Girard is when most of your desire is physical and less of it is metaphysical. That's a very simple way to cut it. So for me, after college, I went down to be on the founding team of another company. This one is doing very well. It was certainly a lot better than the one that failed. And there, it was just I wanted to make money. Okay, like I just wanted to make money to sustain the other pursuits in my life. And so that was physical in that sense. Like I was just after the object. But now I've been doing, I've left that company for a year. I built that for 3.5, 4 years. I left that company for a year, and now I'm doing a new interview and lecture series on the great books. And this is just pure enjoyment. So is there a metaphysical being here? Yes, but most of it is physical desire. Like I wake up giddy with excitement that I get to, talk to people like yourself, interview people, and read the books that I want to read. And so hopefully that becomes a lens in which you can understand what sanity is when most of the pursuits in your life aren't about filling this hole of being inside of you. And it's about actually the experience of the action that you enjoy.
Amazing, amazing. It's very. I love the distinction you make between the two. And for me, would it be fair to say that, if you're optimizing for metaphysical desire, you're kind of optimizing for these external experiences or sorry, external appearances, how you appear to other people, how you appear in the eyes of others. Whereas with physical desire, you're optimizing for your internal subjective experience of life, the process of life itself, like your internal reality. Is that
Yeah.
right ballpark?
That's the right ballpark. That's the right first cut. There's a few nuances. The first thing to say about metaphysical desire is it's not just about how you appear to others. It's not just about recognition. So I studied, I did another degree at Columbia actually in philosophy, and I studied with these group of uh, fantastic like modern philosophers who are called recognition theorists. So people like Hegel, Rousseau, Smith, Hume, who talk a lot about precisely what you said about keeping up public appearances. But the way that Girard is different from that, right? And these thinkers, again, very, very loosely, it's like, I want Niall and his followers to think well of me after this podcast. But Girard's metaphysical desire goes a bit beyond that. It's more like what external values you internalized such that even if no one is looking, you're chasing after them. Does that make sense? So, like, let me give you this example. You can externalize the status hierarchies and the symbols of prestige so much in a society such that it becomes your own definition of success, that even if no one else knows, you still feel like you need those things to be successful. So there are people who just care about making a shit ton of money, even if people knowing about how much money they make isn't core to that desire. Does that make sense? So it's still external in the sense that they're still looking around and seeing, okay, who has being? What is the cause of his being? It's money. And money becomes this object that is able to grant being. But the payoff function there isn't just about, I want other people to think I have money. It becomes so internalized that often, even if he's alone, and by the way, this is not a positive thing, okay? This is a deeply frightening and negative thing for Girard. Like even in your internal psyche, you think you need being to get money. Sorry, you need money to have this fullness of being. So that's the nuance that I want to tease out, which is that this external factor can be internalized to such a great degree that it's not just about the moments when we care about what others think of us. It really is about our own sort of impulses. And on the other prong, physical desire, you are right as a first approximation to think about it as our direct experience of things. But that also is heavily dependent on external and societal input. So, for example, if I live in a culture that thinks that believes this proposition that humans can reincarnate into animals, my experience of eating meat is going to be very, very different than your experience of eating meat. And so, even the physical experience is shaped by certain mimetic phenomenon. But you are right in making this first cut. Yeah.
Wow, wow, okay. And as I was thinking about this as well, Jonathan, something else that came to mind, like in my own life, there's been the case where metaphysical desires have become physical for me. So, for example, say whenever I started a podcast, I might have initially launched that because for a metaphysical reason, but as I do it more and more and I interview people, I just love doing this. I love the process of doing this. That's become a physical desire. But vice versa, like running for me, for example, when I started running, I would just go out to a trail on a Sunday and run for a few hours, and I just love doing that. That was a physical desire. And then I got Strava, which is like a social network for runners. And then you're like looking at your time, you're like trying to like, get run at a certain pace and all the rest.
One
So
up each other. Yep.
so it can go both ways. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I think that's it's a very, very good observation. And I think that the real question is how do we turn more of the metaphysical stuff to the physical stuff, right? Like surely you want to be living a life where, it's because of the experience that you live and wake up every day that you're just excited to live. But you are right. Like there is a great way that things can carry over from one side to the other. Maybe I'll speak a bit more about my own theories about this that I'm developing out of Girard. And because clearly one question is, how do we have more of your podcasting experiences and less of the running experiences? And one thing has to do with, okay, the most obvious thing is, do you actually like, is this an activity that you can actually enjoy? Right? Because here's why I liked the philosophy majors a lot more in college than the finance kids who ended up going into investment banking. Like, no one, almost no one loves doing Excel spreadsheets for 50 hours, for like 70 hours a week. So their like physical desire in this early entrance level of investment banking is just non-existent. Like you have to be like a psychopath, right? To actually like doing that. And so the only way you can be motivated is the metaphysical desire, right? There's literally nothing else. So that's like the first obvious thing is like, is this an activity that you can actually sustain on its own? And however, in the case that you gave, in both running and in podcasting, both are, and yet this transition still happens. Um, so I mean, there's so much thing to say here, but the other thing I'll say is, I do think um, what people often overlook when they think about how these things in life transition is the other parts of their life that seemingly have nothing to do with this. So, for example, this is not what you said, but I'm going to give you a hypothetical. You, your podcast is failing. Your girlfriend broke up with you. Your friends moved away, and you feel like a certain lack, and that's why you need to use Strava to feel to ground your identity in some sense. So you can think about the other parts of your life as forming a protective barrier potentially against metaphysical desire. And when those things go away, you kind of just try to latch on to other things, right? And so and this is another way in which this desire for the concern of other people can be a good thing and not a bad thing, which is if I have a lot of people in my life, which fortunately I have now developed over the years, who just like me for me, who are going to be around no matter what, bar I do some crazy atrocity or something like that. You do feel that fullness in being, and you don't need to chase it that much with these metaphysical pursuits. And so, in Rousseau actually talks a lot about this, on why he thinks marriage is important. Because in marriage, so Rousseau thinks that most of us or all of us have this impulse of being the best. So we all want to be in the best in some way. Obviously, not everyone can be in the best in the way that Beckham is the best in society. But Rousseau thinks that through romance, through romantic love, we can all satisfy this desire of being the best, at least for someone, right? Because when I enter into a monogamous marriage with you, that's what I'm saying. Like, you're the best, or at least you're the best I can do, right? Like, and so Rousseau thinks that the institution of marriage in a society is a way for people to satisfy that recognitive drive. So, to put it in Girard terms, they don't lack this sense of being in that domain. And so I joke with my founder friends that I only invest in two types of founders, the single and the unhappily married, right? Because so much of the impulse of building a company is wanting to be to be the best. It's metaphysical, it's big dick swinging, and that can be very useful for building a company. But if you're living a very, very happy life, if you have no chips on your shoulders, if your sexual needs are satisfied, your financial needs are satisfied, your cognitive needs are satisfied, then a lot of people cease to have that motivation, right? And so, by the way, I think we're already starting to tease out another tension within Girard's ideas, which is clearly I don't want to live a life pulled by metaphysical desire. But, and maybe this is evolutionary of why it spanned out, there's clearly a lot of utility in being pulled by metaphysical desire, right? So, like, we will not have investment banking as a profession if people stop having metaphysical desire, because it's the junior work is just so damn boring that no one's going to want to do it unless it's for prestige, right? And so So yeah, I'm rambling a bit, but hopefully I'm drawing out some interesting tensions in the theory.
No, that's fascinating. I've never thought about that before. And so the thing that really sort of stuck out to me from what you said there was this idea, if say you're the podcast fails, the girlfriend breaks up with you, all of these things diminish your sense of being and sort of diminish your sense of self, your identity. And then at that moment, it seems that we're most vulnerable to being taken over by metaphysical desire because that's the thing that we think is going to help us to become more. And to me, that's such an interesting insight. So it's like,
Yeah, I'll add one more thing. The key thing that determines the strength of metaphysical desire is not just your being taken away, but also how much being you want to have. So there's actually, it's the delta of that. So let me give you an example. If you are an arrogant person, you think I need to be the best no matter what, I'm the king of the world, and you're only, let's say, the president of the United States, then you're going to have a lack of being. On the other hand, even if everyone in your life leaves you, you know, you're broken up by your girlfriend, like your business fails, but you have a minimal conception of what you need your being to be. So think about like a Buddhist who's been meditating and practicing, trying to understand emptiness and non-self. Then maybe that is enough. Does that make sense? So there's actually two things that determine the strength of your metaphysical desire and how much you're going to be pulled by that. It's the delta between how much being you expect yourself to have and how much you actually have, which means there's two strategies to improving this part of your life. One is actually building up the social dimensions, right? Having a loving family, having loving friends who support you, having things you actually do that you like. But another is to reduce the idea of being you need. But again, I just want to highlight this, like that will reduce a lot of the motivation people have for doing things. Like I am certainly better off in life by being unreasonably pulled by metaphysical desire to study math, to study the classics, to get into an Ivy League, to build a company that's going to give me financial freedom. If metaphysical desire wasn't there, I almost wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing now. And so maybe one way we can think about it, again, this is me, right? This is not Girard at this point. Maybe one way to think about it is of a booster rocket. So metaphysical desire, no kid is just going to love calculus for its own sake, right? So maybe you need some metaphysical desire about competition, like, or are you smart, or do you want to be a dumb man? Like, do you want to be dumb? If you don't want to be dumb and stupid, then do math, and right. And so, obviously, speaking from my own experience, but yeah, does that make sense?
totally, totally. And this is gonna be a very simplistic way to sort of to frame it, but it's almost like, well, in my own life, my own experience has been that if I'm doing something as a means to an end, if I'm saying, right, I'm doing this now because it's going to lead to this outcome in the future that's going to make me happy, almost every project I've launched on that basis has failed. Whereas if I do something and it's like I'm going to enjoy the process of doing it, regardless if I fail or not, it tends to go well. Very simplistic,
Yeah,
but that's what I've found in my own.
exactly. That's exactly how I framed my switch of careers from tech into more of what I'm doing now, which is again is just intellectual work, which is when I was building the business, even the one that worked, I had the sense that even if I succeeded, I would have failed. Like even if this would become a $1 billion company, it's looking like it's going to be a $1 billion company within the next 10 years. But even if I did that and I spent the rest of my 20s doing this, I would have failed in some deep sense because I don't really want to do that, like physical desire wise. I want to spend my 20s um, basically chasing ideas and exploring. But how I feel about this current thing that I'm doing, right? This Western Canon Great Books lecture series is even if I fail, I succeeded. Even if after a year no one watches any of my stuff, people stop engaging with any of the content. The fact that I got to spend these 2 years just to talk with people and read that is already the reward, right? And so again, that's another way to cut this physical desire versus metaphysical desire, which is the physical desire. The reward is the thing is living. Metaphysical desire is no, you only get that boost in being when you acquire that thing. And keep in mind, Girard thinks that metaphysical desire is always deceitful. So it's always I mean, we have an experience of this. You didn't feel like Beckham for more than 3 days, I imagine, as a kid after you got the shoes. And there was some other thing, right? And, we think getting this job will make me so happy. That might last a month. Getting a partner might make me so happy. That might last like 2 months. And so, yeah, Girard thinks that this is a never-ending kind of rat race. But again, that's why the human desire is never ending. Like, in some sense, if we didn't have metaphysical desire, we would have stopped at the first hut and be like, yeah, I'm living a good life. Like, why do I got to progress? In fact, Rousseau, in his second discourse, says that to this desire, metaphysical desire, what he calls amour propre, I'm equating these things very loosely here for the public audience, is what built civilization. Like, we wanted to be we wanted to be better than others. We wanted to win at the status symbols and games within society. And that's why we don't just build a hut and call it a day. That's why we did agriculture. Well, why we did, some people compete in intellectual life. Some people run podcasts. Some people build spaceships. And so this is where the tension in the theory comes in, right? Girard is always extremely ambivalent. So, which is what I love. So he's not just saying this thing's good, this thing's bad. He's very ambivalent in his psychology. A metaphysical desire, on one hand, is something that sort of leads you on one wild goose chase after the other, but it's also what probably made your life good in the first place. It's what built civilization. And then Girard's other part of the theory, maybe we can talk about that later on, is also ambivalent. So he thinks that Christianity, for example, is going to bring us to apocalypse and literally like violent apocalypse. And so again, something very good bring about something very dangerous. And so yeah, his whole theory is extremely ambivalent. There's no easy answers.
This could very easily be a 3 hour conversation. We've only got another another maybe half an hour. Something that came to mind for me whenever I was preparing for this as well was like, have you run the thought experiment in your own mind? What would happen to human society if overnight metaphysical desire just became extinguished in all 7 billion people or whatever? Like, just it became irrelevant. What would society look like? Would there be, you know,
I think Girard has a very simple answer here, which is just look at how monkeys are. Because Girard, despite him being Christian, subscribes to evolution. And what evolution consists in for Girard is two things. One is the increase of our mimetic capacity, and that directly inflames this metaphysical desire. But it also creates the basis for language. Like, the reason we can do language is because of our mimetic capacity, right? That's why, like, our language capacities are better than apes, and apes can do sign language, but dogs can't do sign language, right? And so, um, but there's this other thing, which is the second part of Girard's theory that we should probably talk about, which is what he calls the scapegoat mechanism. Because when apes become more and more, but anyways, to answer your question, what would society look like if humans were more mimetic? Apes. Because the direction of human evolution for Girard is primarily, biologically at least, the direction of increased incapacity of mimesis. Now, here's the issue. As you probably know, as you probably have seen, mimetic desire is a convergent force. It makes our desires converge to things, right? So I desire this girl, you desire this girl too. By the way, this is why Girard thinks competition precedes scarcity and not scarcity precedes competition, right? An economist would think, oh yeah, things are scarce, like real estate in Tribeca, and we compete over them. And Girard says, no, it's because we compete for them. It's that mimetic frenzy that generates that scarcity. Okay. There's an obvious problem with this converging thing of desire is that it leads us into conflict, right? Because even if we desire different things in the beginning, mimetic desire is going to lead us to converge on the similar thing, and boom. Girard thinks as apes increase in their mimetic capacities, there were these conflicts became more and more extreme until it ended up destroying almost all the ape societies, except for a subset of societies that were able to develop not a biological, but a cultural mechanism that he calls the scapegoat mechanism. So how the scapegoat mechanism works is when an entire society is in frenzy, someone randomly is going to say this person is to blame. And that is going to catch on when the until the entire group believes one person is to blame for the entirety of the society's issues. Now you might think, "Oh, this is ridiculous. Who would ever believe that?" Nazi Germany, right? Today in contemporary politics, the right wing is saying, "Oh, those, I mean, in your country, like those Muslim immigrants are doing this," and the left wing is saying, "Oh, the woke, the sort of racist white men are doing that," right? We have this tendency of just wanting to pin all the blame of a society to this one thing. Like, I think 2 years ago, I saw this one thing where certain deaths in Canada were attributed to climate change. Right. I mean, and the logic was, well, it's getting hotter, then there's forest fires, and forest fires cause these deaths. But that gives you an idea that like we're pulled to these simple solutions. We're pulled, and these simple solutions can have this way about capturing an entire society. And what this allows the society to do is it allows, because it's all against one, to cathartically expel this blamed person or group. And again, this just happened with Nazi Germany. And Girard thinks that this catharsis will bring about a degree of peace. And so he thinks that, again, the scapegoat mechanism is what brings about peace in society. So, in other words, all society is founded on violence and deceit. And again, hopefully you can see the ambivalence in Girard's theory here. This clearly is something wrong and deceitful to blame a certain group for all the problems. But it's the only thing that prevented early humanoid societies, so Girard thinks, from collapsing, from being completely destroyed. And so I hope you can already start to get an intuition of why Jesus is the exact opposite. Because Jesus exposed the scapegoat mechanism by giving himself up, essentially, I'm speaking very loosely here, as the ultimate scapegoat. However, as we know, if the scapegoat mechanism weakens, then you don't have anything to resolve the conflict anymore. And so that's why Jesus, I think it's Matthew 13:35, Jesus says, "Think not, I'm come to bring peace. I bring not peace, but a sword." And different Christian traditions have interpreted this to be quite figurative. Oh, you're going to have these arguments, non-believers, believers, going to have these internal familial debates. No, Girard literally reads this as saying Christ is going to bring about tremendous violence in the world because he upsets the scapegoat mechanism. So now that we're on to psychology, the scapegoat mechanism is Satan for Girard. It's Satan because it's deceitful, it's lying, it blames victims. But remember, there's a common tradition associating Satan with the princes and principalities of the world. So the scapegoat mechanism is the foundation of all politics, and so yeah. So I'll pause there. That was a lot.
This I think the penny's starting to drop for me here, just the significance of all of this. And that that idea that our whole society was based on a lie, this lie of the scapegoat. And this is how we sort of um kept the peace almost. And if the Christian story is at least partially true, Jesus came along and he exposed that lie. And for the first time ever, the story was told from the perspective of the victim. And that is what has fundamentally changed our society. And one of the interesting things I've heard you talk about and
But not
talk,
necessarily for the better. Not necessarily for the better,
yeah,
right? Like it's ambivalent. Yeah.
yeah. And Tom Holland speaks about this as well. But like before that happened, there was no, or it was not common practice for a society to have respect for victims or to look after victims or all the rest. Like in ancient Roman societies and Greek societies and all the rest, it was worship of power. It was totally this idea that we all take for granted that we should look out for the weak and vulnerable is something that is totally that'll happen around the advent of Christianity. It's just totally mind blowing.
Oh yeah, yeah. And there's been a complete revaluation of values. I mean, in some sense, this is what Nietzsche was complaining about, right? Comparing Greco-Roman values, which is like idolizing power, versus the Judeo-Christian values, which seem to elevate the victim. Yeah.
And have you any examples of like I think maybe a good way to explore this might be through trying to understand cancel culture in modern society. That's a big thing nowadays. Like how might a Girardian lens help us to understand that?
So, first of all, notice that the language of cancel culture is to protect the victim. right? It's because, you're a racist white man who's doing this unthinkable deed. And so that language is already very different from Judeo-Christian value, sorry, from Greco-Roman values, right? In antiquity, how does Achilles introduce himself? I'm the son of Peleus, right? He starts by naming all his noble ancestors. But Girard thinks that there's something very odd here that goes on in Christian society, which is we still have this need for persecution, for peace, not just for peace, but we have a psychological drive, a yearning for catharsis. And so what happens is in Christian society, and he would like in modern Western society, like any society touched by Christianity, it doesn't have to be like a Christian theocracy. What happens is people use the rhetoric of the victim to persecute others. So the Christianity's success is so total that this idea that we must protect victims is so total that it becomes the only weapon you can use for persecution. Does that make sense? And so cancel culture for Girard is it's not anti-Christian, it's hyper-Christian. It's something that appropriates the Christian message for what he would consider the satanic aim of persecution. And so remember, there's actually two bad guys in the Bible. There's Satan, and Satan is this kind of Greco-Roman prince and principalities. I'm just going to shamelessly persecute. So Girard compares Nazi Germany with Satan. But there's another figure, and that figure is the Antichrist. And the Antichrist does not oppose Jesus in the same way that Satan does. The Antichrist pretends to be Jesus, right? If you read the New Testament, the Antichrist is someone who sits on the throne of Christ. The opposite movement that Girard points to in the 20th century is like Soviet communism. That's the Antichrist. Because the rhetoric is about protecting victims, right? So Nazi Germany openly persecuting victims and proud of it. They persecuted victims. Soviet communism, in Girard's view, openly persecuted victims in the name of protecting victims. And so the modern far right and far left for Girard all have this impulse of persecution, but he thinks that the far left is a lot more dangerous. The reason is because they disguise themselves as not really being persecutors. And that is a message that is a lot easier to digest. If we look at someone on the far right, the modern intuition is to say this person is just directly evil. It discounts the theory. If we look at these like cancel culture, it co-ops, Girard thinks, our desire to protect the victim and sort of satanizes it. Yeah.
Wow, this is absolutely mind-blowing. Okay, so I want to now move into some practical applications here. And can you
Please.
tell us, you have a metaphor you speak about, is it John Boyd and fighter pilots
Yes.
and this whole idea of, you know, we create our social environment and then our social environment kind of creates us. Maybe tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah. So I think Boyd, who I think was a fighter pilot or instructor, had this one line, which is he says, superior fighter pilots use their superior judgment so they don't have to use their superior skill. In the sense that what makes a fighter pilot so good, even if they can win any dogfight, is that they have really, really good judgment to position themselves in a position against their foes that they don't even have to use their superior dogfighting skills. And this is kind of the metaphor I had with what learning about mimetic theory did for me, which is it clearly didn't make me any less mimetic. And if I'm trapped in a mimetic frenzy already, I don't think I'm any more protected against it. But what it does give me the ability is it gives me the ability to, when things are sober, when reason can have control, it helps me see the potential roadblocks ahead that I can navigate away from. Does that make sense? So in Girard's view, when you're in the mimetic frenzy, like reason, he frames it like this: reason, when it's most needed, is least available. Like when at the height of the Weimar Republic, when reason is most needed, It's when people are least reasonable. And so the only thing that the only place that reason can actually do something is like 10 years before Nazi persecution happens to navigate Germany away from this terrible thing that they were heading into. And that's a metaphor I have in my own life. Like here's a great example. One of the reasons I chose not to go into the academy, right, to pursue philosophy, I might do another PhD in actually the UK, but that's a whole other conversation, is the academy is set up like a crazy mimetic environment. It's like Goldman Sachs, but for like philosophy. And so, again, once I'm already in there, there's probably not that much I can do. There's not that much knowing mimetic theory will help me with. But being able to see what constitutes a potentially dangerous mimetic environment and what is a more sober mimetic environment and how to construct those things, that's like you engaging the enemy fighter pilot when before the dogfight, positioning yourself well. Yeah. So that's what I meant.
Yeah, yeah. I think that this is maybe for me, it's the most important takeaway from Gerard's work. I had an experience actually this year where I went to an entrepreneur conference, um, and it was quite expensive to attend. And I was there at the conference. I was in the thick of it, and they have this membership, and it's really expensive to join. But by joining, you're sort of surrounding yourself with these like mega wealthy entrepreneurs on a regular basis, and you attend these meetings and all the rest. And like at the time when I was there, I was really caught up, and I was like, right, I'm going to join, right? And after like I was flying back home, and I had a few days thinking, but I was like, do you know what? If I join, this is going to take my time or put my focus solely on making money and take away all my time and energy from the things I actually want to spend my time doing. And I was like, what the fuck am I doing? This is totally like, and it was only because I was aware of mimetic theory that I was aware, okay, this is not going to
Yeah,
be good for me in the long run, you know?
exactly. And that's a great example. Before you, like with mimetic theory, you are able to know if I join this, this is what's going to happen to me. I'm going to have such an extreme desire for money that I won't be able to pull myself out of it. Now, if you actually joined, knowing mimetic theory probably wouldn't help with that at all. Because these things will just work. It might help a little bit, right? But this is exactly the power it gives you because before you know mimetic theory, the common view is, well, my desires are my own. So why don't I just join that thing and use all the resources there and not be affected by it? And I can still decide what I want to do later on. But no, you correctly realize that the decision between joining and not joining was not just about how you spend your time and money. It was about who you wanted to be and what you wanted your desires to be. So that's a great example.
Yeah, yeah. Something else I find interesting that you said, Jonathan, is this idea that, you know, we can't escape this desire for recognition. So instead of like just trying to say like I don't care, like Mark Manson's sort of book like the subtle art of not giving a fuck or whatever, it's like instead of doing that, let's actually just be conscious about who we desire recognition from, narrow it down to the important people, and that just gives us a lot more. I don't know, there's a lot of freedom in that.
Yeah, yeah. And it's funny, the people who don't care what other people think about them, allegedly, are always the ones telling other people that they don't care. And most often it's someone who does care what you think of them, and they want you to think of them as someone who doesn't care. And so, yeah, this is like a pretty strong philosophical opinion that I hold is that we can't stop caring about just what anyone thinks about us. But there are healthier, more and less healthy ways of satisfying that recognition. So the least healthy way would probably be you construct this image just online of people who you think you are, and you have no intimate relationships who actually know who you actually are. And, one way around that is just to be surrounded by friends who you have such a secure recognitive environment already in your own private life that, you don't care that much about things that happen online to you and stuff like that. So yeah.
Do you consciously curate your incoming information flow? Like, do you unsubscribe from things that you know are going to be potentially mimetic for you?
Oh, I don't use social media at all. So I only post stuff on social media. The only exception I have is maybe I watch some YouTube stuff. But there I block out all the feed. because I know these big tech companies are trying to poison me essentially. They're trying to get me to use their platform as much as I can. So yeah, I'm not on Instagram. I'm not on Twitter. I post stuff on there, but I just block off all the feeds. And the only thing I really use is I go to a few channels that I subscribe to and I actively seek out. And yeah, most of my time is just spent reading and talking to people like yourself. And yeah,
Amazing, amazing. You know, do you think we have the capacity to consciously choose models that are going to be good for us in the long run? Because we're all going to have models. Do we have capacity to, like, let's say, pick a certain biography because we know this person has a good way of life, and I want to.
I I think so. I think so, but it's I can't remember what 20th century philosopher had this analogy. I think it was Quine maybe, but he had this analogy of gaining knowledge as you're on this raft in the ocean and you can take off, like this is the raft, and you can take off one of the planks here and move it here. And if you do that over and over again, you can shift the entire raft and the whole conception. But what people shouldn't have the idea is that they shouldn't have the idea you can just, be whatever you want, desire whatever you want. I can stop this desire. Like everyone's just immersed in a social environment. But I think what mimetic theory gives you the ability to do is to nudge that environment and change that over time. And so, yes, we do have conscious capacity, but it comes about doing these small things, like, for example, not going on social media, for example, choosing who you hang out with. So it's an everyday decision that you've got to make.
Hmm. And with regards to Girard's own personal conclusions, they're quite unsettling. How did Girard spend the last few years of his life? What was his key takeaway from all of his study into mimetic theory?
There's definitely different ways to read him. I read him as taking the what is called the Benedictine option, which is to withdraw from the world. So I think he got more and more pessimistic. His last major book, Battling to the End, is an apocalyptic book, and it's to describe why all the forces we talked about, mostly Christianity, is literally bringing about a violent end to the world. And the younger Girard was still hopeful. There was things that could be done, but the more elder Girard was, in my reading, quite withdrawn and retreatist. And so there, he just seemed to suggest like, yeah, don't engage with the world because that's going to mess you up really bad. And retreat, withdraw, pray. I mean, he was asked in one of these conferences, "What should we do?" And he just said, "Pray." There's different ways to read Girard, but there's that withdrawn tendency is definitely there. So yeah,
If you could have him over for dinner this evening and you could ask him a few questions, or anything you'd love to ask Girard?
that's a good question. I don't know. I don't know. I have to think about that a bit more. But I've almost, you know what? I probably want someone. There are people. Yeah, I probably want to have someone like the Buddha or Jesus more. I'm obviously for obvious reasons over for dinner. But yeah, I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't have an answer there.
No worries, no worries. And I've heard you say as well that Girard and mimetic theory should come with a warning label. Why?
Right. Um. Well, I think all philosophy should come with a warning label because, again, we're not purely rational creatures. We can just choose to be a certain way when we decide it. And there's a certain way that certain philosophies uh, turn you into. So I studied with a lot of critical theorists at Columbia, and not so much the professors, but a lot of these students, especially the grad students in critical theory, were just quite miserable. And I think a part of that had to do with the kind of philosophy that they were reading. Um, what are the side effects of Girard? Well, one, there's this sort of hopelessness and withdrawn thing. The world is going to end. That's one of the conclusions that he comes to, a violent end. But I think if you don't read him well, you can come to the conclusion that everything's mimetic, therefore nothing is everything is kind of useless and meaningless. So that's another worry that one could have going into Girard. And just being alienated from oneself in the social world. Yeah. But that's a misreading of Girard, I think.
Okay.
But the apocalypse thing is I don't think is a misreading. I think it's quite valid to read him that way.
Okay. Well, we can end on that very large cliffhanger.
Right.
Where can people learn more about your work online, Jonathan? Where can they find you? And you've a new lecture series out soon. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, so if you want a very thorough introduction to Girard's theory that's going to build off everything we said today, I produced a 10-hour lecture series with my friend David Perell, and that's all on YouTube. You just search my name, Johnathan Bi, Johnathan Bi. And yeah, for the last year, and hopefully for the foreseeable future, I've been working on a lecture series on the great books. So I try to give practical, accessible, entertaining, but also rigorous introductions to the great books. So we've done Nietzsche, two on Rousseau, one on Shakespeare, and we're gonna do a few on Stoicism. That's what I've been working on now. So
Amazing. Well, Jonathan, you're doing great work. I want to wish you the best of luck going forward.
thanks, man. Thanks for having me.